when Jody approached me, how long ago was it, Jody? 8 months ago, probably, about this dual program, something like that. I was trying, we were kind of brainstorming how we were going to tackle this. And I just came out of a really busy time of year. From January to April is my wildlife tax valuation season. Some of you might remember back in the 90s, there was a proposition called Prop 11, where they put it to the people of Texas to vote. Hey, do you guys want a wildlife tax valuation similar to the agricultural tax valuation? Thankfully, everybody voted in a manner that got it approved. So now, not only can you do agricultural practices to lower your property taxes, but you can also do wildlife. So for those of you that don't know that's available, it is. There's some specific guidelines that have to go into it. So it's going to be kind of tricky in the urban areas to qualify for it. But on the flip side of that, as the Austin County biologist, I have a lot of people that move out of the Houston area that are done with the city and they want to move out to the country. And they sign up for this as soon as they can because everybody knows property taxes in Texas are getting ridiculously high. As somebody who rents an apartment because I can't afford a home. So we're going to jump right into it. I'm hoping to not put you guys to sleep. If I do, somebody throw something at me to wake them up. So what is the wildlife use appraisal? That's just a fancy word for saying the wildlife tax valuation. It's often called a wildlife exemption. It's not an exemption. When that screen comes up, there's a nice fancy little X. It's not an exemption. You're not exempt from paying taxes. The government's going to get their tax money regardless of what you do. Death and taxes are the only two things guaranteed in life. It's a valuation. You are taxed based off of the productivity of the land. So what you are currently taxed on your properties is what the land is worth, fair market value. What these valuations do is they essentially reduce it to what is the productivity of the land. Whenever you start taking away the full market value of the land and you start putting agricultural and wildlife stuff on it, it's deemed as less productive, so you don't have to pay as much money to keep it, which I think is a bit ironic. But
yeah,
so it's a special use valuation. You still pay full market value on the developed land. So whenever they do these things, your home site is normally carved out. So you still pay full market value on your actual home site. But for, let's say you have 20 acres in Austin County, instead of paying full market value, which can be, anybody that lives in Austin County knows it can be quite expensive. That can reduce it 60 to 80%.
wow.
So keep that in mind, anybody, as we're going through this. And if you live in Fort Bend or Austin County and you qualify for these things, call me in January so that we can get this work done so you can pay less on your property taxes. So qualifications for it. This is the tricky part about this. So whenever they pushed through the Prop 11 stuff, you still had to meet qualifications as a qualified open space land. What that means is you still have to be in agricultural appraisal before you can switch into wildlife. So you have to be in an agricultural appraisal for 5 out of 7 years before you can switch into wildlife. That's kind of how they get a lot of people. They want you to go through ag and do all of that before you can get into wildlife. The kicker for getting into ag, as most of you know, if you've tried it, Jody probably knows about it because of the bees. You need acreage to do the wildlife. So the minimum, from my understanding, that you can do for any ag valuation is about 5 acres. So you need at least 5 acres because that's the minimum for bees. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jody.
Ponds and fruit orchards also.
Yes. So 5 acres is your minimum. So if you do not have 5 acres, you can still do these things. You just won't be able to do the wildlife tax valuation. As your wildlife biologist, I still recommend you do these because it's good for wildlife. But you just won't get the valuation. So you have to have at least 5 acres. And that's kind of the double-edged sword for a lot of these urban areas. Most people are living on half an acre, 1 acre, 2 acre. But if you've got at least 5, pay close attention to a lot of these things. There's something called primary use. And for this valuation, the primary use has to be for wildlife management, whether that is for hunting, fishing, or something as simple as you're a bird watcher and you like to watch birds on your back porch having a morning coffee. That is a wildlife management primary use. It can be that simple. I have a lot of people that I push bird management on because I'm a bird guy, and most people like to get out of the city to go watch birds. Insects can count, ironically enough. Raccoon sanctuaries can count. I've seen that pass. Yes. I'll get into some of those things as we progress. Yeah. Trust me, we'll get through this. I've seen some interesting ones get approved. So the third qualification for it, you have to be actively managing to sustain a breeding, migrating, or wintering population of indigenous wildlife. That's very important. You have to sustain a breeding, migrating, or wintering population. I will get to why that's important as we go through. This is introducing kind of these things. You'll hear me talk about the 7 eligible management practices. You have to meet 3 of them. As somebody who likes to be by the book, I recommend 4 because then you have an extra one in case one of them fails, you still have your 3. That's just how I like to play those games. I'm always liking to stack the deck in everyone's favor. Wildlife is managed for human use. Again, human use, that's your bird watching, that's your hunting, that's your fishing, your insect watching, your raccoon sanctuary, any of those crazy things. And the land has to meet a specified wildlife use requirement. If applicable, I'll get to that. That gets a little bit tricky. Primary use, actively managed under a wildlife management plan. So again, those 3 wildlife management practices implemented to the degree of intensity outlined in the guidelines. Is anybody in here already on a wildlife tax valuation? Has anybody ever tried to look through the 200-something page guidelines for that? Did you actually read all 200 pages of it?
No.
Thank goodness, because I haven't either. There's a nice, pretty little 10-page document that I give everybody that is the abridged version of that. It's very handy. With primary use, it has to be given priority over other uses and activities. So a problem that a lot of us run into in places like Austin County, people still want to have their cattle. And most people on 25 acres are going to have 20 head of cattle. And anybody that knows anything about grazing regimes, that's a lot of cattle on 25 acres, and your grass is going to look like a golf course, which is not conducive with wildlife. So this has to take priority. You can have cattle with this plan, but it has to be at the right intensity. Secondary uses cannot interfere. Again, that's your cattle, that's your goats, any of those types of things. If you want to build a golf course on your property, it obviously cannot impede the wildlife. So, and this is where we get into human use. This is all the fun stuff. Sitting on your porch in the evening and watching deer. Watching ducks land in the tank while you're drinking your morning coffee. Watching songbirds from the kitchen window. Taking the children and grandchildren hunting on the family ranch. That's one that I can relate to. That's actually what got me into this career path, was hunting with my dad and my grandfather. This is where I could talk for an entire full day workshop about these practices, and I'm not going to do that because it's going to put everybody to sleep. I'm going to go over all of the practices. I'm going to go over a couple of the sub practices in there, and we're just going to roll with that. If you want to know more specifics, give me a ring and we can talk about it one day. So these are the 7 overarching practices. So habitat control, erosion control, which in this part of the state is pretty big one. Predator control. There's a neat little thing inside of the predator control that I think everybody can resonate with. Supplemental water, not something that we see a lot of being used down here. Water is not normally a limiting factor in the Gulf marshes and prairie ecosystem. That's designed more for West Texas, the Panhandle, some of South Texas. Supplemental food, as we can see, our nice cute cuddly squirrel getting into our food reserves. Supplemental shelter, this is one that most people will be familiar with. Nest boxes, that is the most prolific supplemental shelter practice out there. Bluebird boxes and the wood ducks. And one that often gets not confused, but missed for some reason, even though people are already doing it with their nest boxes, is census. I love this photo because it shows what our Parks and Wildlife trucks used to look like, and I kind of wish we still had those. Census can be super easy. So again, I could go over an entire day's workshop of these things. So we see right at the top is grazing management. So I'm going to reel us back into when I was talking about having 20 head of cattle on a 25-acre property. You can still graze and get a wildlife valuation on your property. grazing is a very important part of these ecosystems down here. The Post Oak Savanna ecoregion, which is right above us, historically was basically run by grazing by bison and fire. So it's very important as long as it doesn't impede the wildlife habitat, as long as you're not grazing it down to a golf course. Prescribed burning, that is our district's favorite measure of habitat control, because we get to go light stuff on fire. Pretty self-explanatory for anybody that likes to light things on fire. What most people do in these areas is the brush management right there. So how many people are taking care of brush on their properties every single year? Yaupon, cedars, Chinese tallow, all of those things qualify. So most people are already doing a lot of these practices on their properties already, which is great because I get to go out to their property, tell them, hey, you're already doing these things. You write them down, give them to the cat office, they're good to go. Erosion control, this is an important one for this area for obvious reasons. A lot of rain, a lot of interesting areas that have been carved out by Harvey and Beryl and every other hurricane and natural disaster that we have around here. Something as simple as building a pond or repairing a pond can qualify for this. So what happens a lot of times, somebody will move from Houston out to a property in Austin County. There's not a pond on there yet. Property's been in ag for 100 years at this point because the other guy was farming and ranching on it. I tell them to wait to build their pond until after we turn the plan in, because that can count for 10 years worth of practices on your plans. So if anybody wants to build a pond on their property and they're wanting to do this, wait until next year to do it. This is a fun one. So how many people have to deal with feral hogs on their properties in this county? Less than I thought. How many people have to deal with fire ants? Okay, cool, more hands. That counts as predator control. You taking care of fire ants counts as predator control. Because those are the red imported fire ants, those are the non-native fire ants. They impede our grassland birds, all kinds of things, they wreak a bunch of havoc. You'll see on there things like grackle and starling control and brown-headed cowbirds. That's not something that we do a lot of down here. That's mostly in the hill country where they have things like golden cheek warblers, the black-cap vireos to worry about. I've seen it done before. It's kind of strange, but it works. Supplemental water, that can be something as simple as wells, troughs, windmill overflows. Again, that's going to be more for your dry and arid areas. I know we've been in a drought, but we still don't have water as a limiting factor in this area of the state. As much as you go out to West Texas and the Panhandle where they're everywhere. Supplemental food. So this is a fun one to have to go and talk to people about. Most people that I talk to are trying to manage for things like deer. So they're going to be using food plots, stuff like that. You have to look at what your limiting factors are. So a lot of times with these things, water is not a limiting factor. Some places food can be a limiting factor if your habitat is not squared away. Supplemental food is not a fix-all for having bad habitat. And we will say that every day. If you're not managing your habitat well, food plots are not going to be a saving grace, because food plots require water, they require timing, they require soil types, and a lot of times they're not going to come up. Has anybody ever heard the adage of when you need a food plot, you're not going to get the rain, and whenever you don't need the food plot, you're going to get the rain? That holds true most of the time. So that's always a fun one that we have to deal with. I don't use a whole lot of it, but it can be beneficial if that is a limiting factor on your property. This is the one that is prolific with a lot of this supplemental shelter. So that's going to be your nest boxes for bluebirds, owls, ducks, also bat boxes. I know bats get a bad reputation, especially around the urban areas. Those guys are great mosquito control. They're great bug control, and they're cool. Anybody that says bats aren't cool, we need to have a discussion after this. Go out in the parking lot. They're super cool. I love bats. They were one of my pet projects in college that I tried to help out a lot with. I have a very fond memory with bats. But even something like fence line management, Brush piles and slash retention. Anybody on their property have a really ugly dead tree that they just want to get rid of because it's just dead and it's not doing anything productive on their property? It is.
Yes.
Woodpecker habitat. Some of your other birds, your raptor species can use it for a perch spot. Brush piles. Our raccoon sanctuaries. Brush piles are really good. Anybody, this is gonna be a fun one because Jody brought this up earlier. Anybody in here likes snakes?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Oh, thank goodness I have people who like snakes. Brush piles are great for snakes. If anybody has ever wondered if brush piles are a great place to go find a copperhead or any of the other non-venomous snakes that run around here. That's a lesson for everybody. My mother hates snakes and she almost killed a little ribbon snake the other day. And I'm like, don't kill the ribbon snake. It can't even hurt you when it bites you. I've been bitten by a lot of them. It doesn't hurt. And they're adorable. They look like little garden hoses. So, you know, that's your fun little biologist joke of the night to keep you all awake. This is one that often gets forgotten about, but it's a very easy one to do, so I don't know why it gets forgotten. This is how we monitor what wildlife is going on our properties. This is how we know that the things that we're doing for our plan are actually working. When you go to check the nest boxes, that's a census. Whenever you're going around looking for all of the wildlife that you're trying to do these habitat practices for, that's a census. You need to get credit for that. If you're going out and checking your nest boxes once a week, you need to be getting credit for it. So this is normally people's fourth practice that I have for them. If they have any kind of nest boxes on their property, I tell them, go check them once a week, write down what you see, get credit for it. Because you're already doing it. So, I gave y'all a bunch of information. I probably ran through it kind of fast. So, we're all wondering how we get started, right? Well, first of all, you gotta call me. That's a good starting point. We have to define our goals and objectives. Everybody's goals and objectives are going to be different. Slightly, but there's some overarching themes. Improving habitat for native non-game species is an example. So everybody in the state of Texas loves their dove, loves their quail, loves their deer. There's a bunch of non-game species that we can manage for. There's a bunch of songbirds. There's a bunch of mammals and reptiles that are not huntable species that we can manage for. And they often get forgotten about. Restoring or reestablishing native wildlife habitat. I do a lot of prairie restoration work in Austin County, and I actually just have 2 projects trying to come online in Fort Bend County now. So hopefully in the next few years, we have native prairies in Fort Bend County that you guys can go and drive past and look around at, including at the George. That's a really cool partnership that I'm trying to get put through right now, so y'all can go out to the George and see what this country used to look like before we came along. And then increasing existing native game habitat. That's what most of my job revolves around, is more habitat for deer and quail and turkeys, and that's kind of what pays my salary, so I pay attention to that quite a bit. There's overarching habitat components. I don't have to tell most of you guys this. Y'all know this: food, water, shelter, space. That's something that's taught, I'm assuming, probably pretty early in the Master Naturalist campaign. So, identifying your limiting factors in your property, that is where all the habitat practices come into place. Identifying, hey, I've got a lot of erosion going on here. Let's cut that out. So let's do some erosion control. Hey, I don't have a lot of food sources. Let's do supplemental food. My property looks like a golf course. I need some more shelter. Throw up some nest boxes. It's all about those limiting factors on your property. And then taking advantage of the tools, your wildlife management plans, annual reports, comprehensive guidelines. For the ones that do have the wildlife valuations, if you want me to send you a copy of the not 200-page guidelines, let me know. I'll send them to you. Again, it's a lot better than the 200-page one, because I would not ever read that. Some of these are recent, some of these are historic looking, so don't look up in the top right to see how old the screenshots are. This is all available on our website. So this is in the private lands and habitat program section of our website. If you just go to tpwd.texas.gov, go into the land, water, land, private, agricultural land. This is everything for the property tax conversion for wildlife management. And the guidelines, is right there where the arrow is. And what's cool is they also have technical guidance video series for this. So it actually goes in and breaks down all the things that I'm talking about tonight. It's somebody that's probably not as monotone to listen to. So they're probably a little more engaging than I am, but it's a whole video series. And I've had people tell me that video series is great. I still need to watch it to see if it's actually great. This is a fun map that I just recently pulled off the website. So anybody know where we're at? Cool. So we are in the Gulf, Prairies, and Marshes upper portion. The way this map is designed, and I just read this recently, they broke this up into average moisture and humidity, which is why we are in the upper Gulf Marshes and Prairies. Anybody follow how that was done? Because I sure don't, but they did it. So this is a fun little thing from the wildlife appraisal stuff. Whenever you are making the switch from ag to wildlife, there is no minimum acreage requirement. So let's say you were grandfathered in, you had 15 acres and you were switching from ag to wildlife. As long as that 15 acres does not change, there is no minimum requirement. If you went from 50 acres down to 5 acres, then these minimums will kick in. And so you can see, potentially, it might be a little bit odd to see it on here, but for the Gulf, Prairies, and Marshes upper coast, that standard acreage is 12.5 to 16.5. So that person would not qualify if they went from 50 acres down to 5, because that acreage changed from year to year. You'll see a section right there that says WMPA/ES. So that is if you are in a wildlife management property association. That is essentially a group of landowners that do not meet the minimum acreage requirements, so they banded together to make basically a co-op or a property association, so that you can lower the acreage that is required for your minimums. It's a pretty neat little thing. There's actually a section on the plan that asks if you were part of that, because that will kick in these other regulations if you are. So yeah, it's a pretty handy little map to look at. And this is also on the website. And that is where the 200-page guidelines is located. It's in that little thing right there. But again, anybody that wants the condensed version, just give me a ring and I can send that out to you. This is that 200-page comprehensive gigantic booklet that nobody ever looks through. And that is the ecoregion that we are specifically in. That matters from a standpoint of some of the practices and the intensities will change depending on what ecoregion you are in. So like the post oak savanna, the nest box supplemental shelter intensity is higher than down here. So it makes a big difference on what ecoregion you were actually in. Also notice how it says revised in April 2010. Yeah. So we actually just spent 2 days over Zoom, actually over Teams this past summer, looking over this gigantic thing, which is why it took us multiple days. So hopefully there's a revised copy coming out. So there might be some intensity changes to some of that, because some of the intensities are ridiculous. Like planting 200 shrubs or something to reforest something, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. The forms that are necessary, I'll put it this way, if I come out for a site visit on your property, I will bring all these forms to you, but if you ever needed another copy, the actual tax valuation form in a PDF and a Word document are also located on the website. This is what the actual wildlife management plan looks like. So these plans are good for 5-year installments. Now, that's not to say that after 5 years, you're done and you got to start paying property taxes at a high rate again. That just means that that plan is good for 5 years, then you have to renew. It's a very simple process. In Fort Bend County, it's become an easier process, I would say, but it's still kind of really on the fence a little bit. This would be an example of how this form is filled out. So anybody that's doing brush management, there is an intensity meter on that. So essentially the intensity is 10% of the acreage or 10 acres, whichever is less, has to be done to meet the brush management qualification. So if you have 10 acres, you're responsible for 1 acre of brush management. Doesn't sound like a lot, does it? It's not. Most people are already doing that. If you have 100 acres, you're only responsible for 10 acres. You're not responsible for Anything more than that, if you have 200 acres, you're only responsible for 10 acres. It's pretty simple on that. What to include in your plan: description of property and habitat, past history. So everybody kind of scoffs at that when they're like, well, why? They already know what the past history is. Some people might not. Somebody might have just gotten into the CAT office 2 months ago and they're like, I have no idea what was done out here for the last 60 years. And it's important to know what has been done the last 60 years. Was this row crop? Was this in bees? Was this in cattle? That changes how a lot of these goals and objectives are done. Again, your goals and objectives that are unique to your property, all of the activities and practices, time schedules. So some of these practices are time-based. One of my favorite ones to use for people that used to cut hay is something called deferred mowing or deferred shredding. There's a time period for ground nesting birds and fawns between essentially May and middle of July, end of July, that they really need that tall grass for fawning cover and for nesting habitat. So if you go through and shred it, it knocks all that down. You can get credit for not mowing your hay pasture for a few months. You can get credit for being quote unquote lazy and letting it grow wild. It's fantastic. It's great wildlife habitat. And people don't know that it's there, which is why they call me. Record keeping, map of property. Record keeping is the most important thing of this entire valuation. If you take one thing away from this, other than property taxes go down, is record keeping is paramount to this working. You have to document everything because the CAT office will ask. And if you don't have proof of it, they will slap you with 5 years of back taxes. So the 5 years of back taxes sounds very harsh. The reason they do it is because they don't want developments coming in, getting this wildlife valuation or getting this agricultural valuation, faltering on it, and then developing over it. That was the reason that they had the back taxes installed into this. It wasn't to slap private landowners, it was actually to slap developers. Fair game to me. Map of the property is pretty important. That way the CAT office knows what's being done, where it's being done. So when they come and do an audit, they're not scouring across 250 acres to go find a nest box that was right at the entrance of the property. Again, record keeping, that means collecting all your receipts from contract labor, leasing equipment, seed, all of that, any kind of biological records and data. So doing your nest box checks, making sure you have dates and everything like that, any kind of brush management, the dates it was implemented. Photos are great. I'm a wildlife photographer, so I always tell people to take photos. Take before and after photos, take during photos. If you're going out there with a chainsaw, have your spouse take a photo of you cutting down a tree. You can put it on Facebook and you can give it to CAT office. It's a win-win. And again, mark on your maps where those photos were taken so that you have records of where all that's being done. The map of the property can be very simple or it can be very convoluted and complicated. It's what you make it. It can be something that looks like a toddler drew it at dinner with a crayon, or it can be something as convoluted as going into ArcGIS and having all the rasters and everything done. I did it in college. I don't want to do that anymore. So I just go on Google Earth and draw all that stuff. But again, mark where your activities are going on. And this is to help the appraisers know what's going on. We try to make their job easy so that they don't hate us and so that they're not looking for things to disqualify you for. Make sense? Those are the one group of people you don't want to piss off in this whole equation because they have the final say on whether these things are approved or not. So this is a good example. You know, they've got the brush piles listed out here. They've got the warm season and the cool season plots. They've got the one singular bat house mapped out. Now that appraiser can go out there and be like, okay, this is where the bat house is. Because if they didn't know where it was, they'd be scouring the entire property looking for a bat house up in a tree, and they probably never find it. And then they disqualify you because they said it was never up. And it can be as simple as that. And if you need help with that, I'm pretty tech savvy because I'm on a computer almost every day. I can help you draw these maps. This is why I said get with me in January. So this is basically the paperwork time threshold. File between January 1st and April 30th. That's why whenever you guys come by my office between October and April 30th, I'm normally not there because I'm either helping hunters or I'm helping people with this. So I office in there with Jody, a couple doors down the opposite direction from y'all's office. And most of the time my door is closed because I'm not there. So I apologize. But most of what I do is technical land guidance. So private landowner calls me, I drop everything I do to go out there and help. That's pretty much 90% of my job. So a lot of times I'm out. The second line there is something I harp on people quite a bit about. Please don't wait until the last minute. I had 6 of these scheduled on April 29th this year.
Oh, my God.
And I had another person call me on April 30th, and I was like, I cannot, because I have all these other ones to do. So that person will be missing out this year, but it's fine, because they were in it for 5 years before, they can miss a year and it's fine. But don't wait till the last minute. One, because that overloads me with a lot of stuff that I already don't have time to do. And then also, if there are any issues with the CAT office, we have time to fix it before the deadline. Because if we can't fix it before the deadline, you're basically just SOL. And again, keep copies of everything. So if you turn in a copy of your plan, keep a copy of your plan. That should be self-explanatory, but I have to explain it to some people. Keep a copy of everything you turn in. It's always better to have it and not need it. This is basically the annual report. So Austin County asks for an annual report after year 5 of your plan. Fort Bend County asks for one every single year. So all my Fort Bend County people, they will ask for one every year if we go through this. So that means that every year you need to have, it's very simple. It's essentially your wildlife management plan, but just asking for documentation that you did everything that you said you did. It's very simple. You can copy and paste 90% of the stuff from your wildlife management plan into the report. Will the plan be approved? I don't have the final say on this. I will just go ahead and say this right now. The CAT office has the final say on whether it will or will not. But if you are currently appraised for that agricultural valuation 5 out of the last 7 years, if you're applicable for this, if you meet the acreage requirement, again, if the acreage is not changing size, you don't have to worry about meeting acreage requirements. If you're actively managing to propagate, sustaining, breeding, migrating, wintering population, that's a pretty big one. If you've got your 3 out of 7 practices, and you're managing at the appropriate intensity level, you're good to go. The other thing I will say is if the CAT office does deny you, I cannot fight them for you. So you'll have to fight them yourselves. If it's a question of intensity, call me. If it's a question of why they denied you, take it up with us. Something to keep in mind. We talked about raccoon sanctuary and birds and all this stuff. Not everything qualifies, and there are very specific reasons why. So, especially in these counties where it's smaller acreage, managing for white-tailed deer on 15 to 20 acres will not qualify. Anybody that knows anything about deer management, 15 to 20 acres is not a sustaining breeding population acreage. They need much more acres than that. That's not to say that you don't have a group of deer that hangs out every evening at 7 p.m. and eats out of your backyard, but they don't live there. They don't breed there. They don't have a sustained population. They use your habitat and go elsewhere throughout the day. That's a big one that I have arguments with about a lot. You cannot manage for just one black-cap vireo on a 500-acre property. That's too low of an intensity level. They will not accept that. If you have one black-cap vireo on your property, they're gonna be like, okay, cool. Find us about 100 more and then we'll talk. We were talking about Houston toads earlier. No managing for Houston toads in the Trans-Pecos. The habitat's not there. So if the habitat's not there, you cannot manage for them, they will deny you. That should be also self-explanatory. No managing for axis deer, because it has to be a native species, not an exotic. We are not trying to improve habitat for axis deer. As much as I love to eat them, and as pretty as they are, they're not supposed to be here. And I would much rather my deer outnumber them quite a bit. So, paperwork's done, it's turned in. Now what do? One, we don't call and asking me if it's been approved or not. The rule of thumb with this, if you don't hear from the CAT office after you turned it in, it's good. No news is good news. That means that it went through, you can start implementing everything that's in your plan. It's all about a good faith effort. So anybody that's ever done the agricultural side of this, you can say all you want that you're gonna grow 100 acres worth of cotton this year. And then we don't get the rain, or we get too much rain, or we get any other number of things and that cotton does not come up. They don't slap you on the wrist for it not coming up. You can't control that. It's the same with wildlife. Let's say that you're planting, an acre worth of sunflowers for food plot for dove. And it doesn't come up because you didn't get the rain required at the time. They're not gonna slap you on the wrist for that. You put in a good faith effort, you planted it, you did it at the right time. You're good. The CAT office is not a group of biologists in the same way that a group of biologists are not appraisal district people. We are not trying to fight each other on any of this stuff. As long as there's a good faith effort to do the things that you are trying to implement, we're good. You half-ass things, that's when it turns into a problem. Management is a verb. So anybody that's ever had a piece of property that's done a lot of things, it can be a lot of hard work. That's the fun part. Everybody loves all of the benefits of doing all the hard work. Yes, chopping down weesatch for 12 hours a day when it's July sucks. Seeing what that habitat is after you got done doing that is awesome. It's great, it's rewarding. I grew up in the country having to go out in the river bottom with chiggers and ticks and everything else and cutting down trees and dealing with alligators and everything else. But the habitat was always great whenever hunting season came around. We always had deer and ducks. So we have to do things. This is not one of those things where we sit idly by and wait for nature to do its thing. And with that, I have my judging clock that's looking at everybody that I love having up here. I did take that, actually, yeah. I waited for him to look at me so that I could take that photo. So, anybody have anything?
Would buffaloes be a wildlife or not wildlife?
Go ahead and repeat the question.
So the question is, would buffalo be considered wildlife, like native wildlife versus non-native wildlife, or wildlife versus ag?
Yeah, well, would it be ag or would it be it's not cattle?
I would have to ask the appraisal district because in places like Montana and Wyoming, they are considered ag. In Texas, it's interesting because elk technically are considered non-native in this
In
state.
Columbus, they got buffalo. That's why I say that.
Correct. Yeah, understood. I would have to ask the appraisal district how that would have to be evaluated. I would love to see more bison used for agricultural purposes throughout the state. I'm big on that, but there's a lot of people that are against it. It's going to be interesting. I will actually find that out and see what the answer is to that, because I do not know the answer. And my default for any of this wildlife tax valuation stuff, ask the CAD, because they're the final say anyway, but I will actually ask them on this, because that's a good question that I never thought of. Because I thought that people didn't care about bison in this state anymore.
Common is that for cat to access amount of good on.
The question is how often and how basically does the CAD come out and check to see that you're doing things? In Fort Bend County, fairly often. In Austin County, not very often. Austin County is a lot more forgiving on things, I guess is the best way to put it. Austin County, they are not actively trying to find things. I feel like in Fort Bend County, a lot of times they're trying to find things. That has changed. I do know some people that it's been 2 or 3 years since the CAD has been out to their property to look at things. So I feel like they're kind of backing off a little bit. It depends on the county.
So it seems that this varies a great deal from the ag valuation requirements and monitoring and all that. Is that so different because it's a newer type of program, or it seems like when you have an ag exemption valuation, you're kind of good to go for agriculture.
Yeah, so the question is, the ag seems to vary a lot from the wildlife. The wildlife seems to be a lot more intensive. Why exactly is the wildlife more intensive than the ag side? There's a lot more, and Jody can argue with me on that, but he feels that it needs to be. I feel there's a lot more that goes into the actual wildlife habitat side of things versus the ag side of things. So like running cattle. You're out there making sure that your cows aren't starving to death, making sure that your calves are where they need to be. I grew up helping cattle stuff, and it seemed like the wildlife habitat stuff was always a lot more intensive than any of my uncle's cattle stuff. And I think too, what this is, there's a lot of people that would prefer people be on an agricultural valuation in this state rather than a wildlife valuation. Because from a historic standpoint, this was a cattle and agricultural state. So it's still kind of new. People don't want to. I've heard this from the agricultural side. They think that the wildlife side should
Yes.
not be there. Because they feel that they should kind of have their own thing and wildlife was just kind of off to the side. Jody, would you like to have a counterpoint?
Sure.
Because I'm completely open to a counterpoint on that.
Well, I think that the wildlife management is easier and cheaper than most ag valuations. I do honeybees for people, at least beehives people for ag valuation, minimum of 5 acres. On 5 acres, you have a minimum of 6 beehives. And it's costly. And I mean, they pay me to put hives in the property and manage them. And I tell people, I'll do it for 5 years, but then you need to switch to wildlife. Whether it's 5 acres or 20 acres, because it's gonna be easier and cheaper in the long run. Plus, you're promoting native species and habitat, which we need more of in this county, especially as as it becomes more urban. But most of your agricultural production is expensive. I mean, think about row crops. I mean, these farmers have millions of dollars of equipment. They pay, thousands of dollars to lease plots. And a lot of times they're leasing 5, 20, 50 acres from a bunch of different people. And, if you switch 50 acres to wildlife, then throw up a few bat boxes and let some make some brush piles and do some census. That's a lot easier than planting a bunch of cotton, right? They don't grow cotton in the panhandle. It grows better there anyway.
My counterpoint will be, you know how expensive it is to run a brush hog for a couple of days? And 2, this is another kicker for switching to wildlife. And this may balance out the agricultural side a little bit. You lose your ag and timber card when you switch to wildlife. So all of your taxes taken away on your heavy equipment that you get from the ag side, that goes away from the wildlife side. Which is why I tell people, if you are on ag valuation, before you switch to wildlife, buy all your fancy toys with your ag and timber card before you switch. So I do agree with those points. It also depends on what you are able and willing to do. If you're, a young couple that are in their 40s that can go out there with a chainsaw and whack a bunch of trees for a couple of days in a row, cool. Most of my landowners that are moving to Austin County are in their 70s and 80s, and they cannot use a chainsaw for 12 hours a day and move trees. And it's just, I wouldn't want to do that at that age. I don't want to do it in my 30s. I do it in my 30s, but I don't want to. I'd much rather get somebody else to do it. It sucks when it's 110 outside. So there's trade-offs, right? It depends on what stage of life you're at too. So yes, it can be expensive. I'm coming from it mostly from hay production side. So not necessarily row crop. A lot of people are not switching from row crop to wildlife. It's kind of difficult.
I was just gonna add a little history of the question about the CAD that coming to look at your property. They used to never do it. We've had our exemption now for 15, 16 years. But as Fort Bend counties become more populous, people are buying 5, 10 acres, 20 acres. My horse friends are doing it. And they're saying, oh, we'll keep our horse here and take ag exemption through wildlife, where they're really just trying to not pay taxes, as much taxes on their horse property. So the CAD got much more stringent about 10 years ago, coming out and saying, you give a bat box out in your horse pasture, or are you actually managing for the fat? So they started looking a whole lot more closely at that.
Which in my opinion is completely fair and valid. If you're gonna do the wildlife valuation, do the work and make it for wildlife, but I'm biased, so.
So circling back, how many raccoons?
So it's not, so the question is, how many raccoons do I need to qualify for? It's not necessarily a set number of raccoons. It's, are you providing the habitat for the raccoons? Remember, good faith effort. Are you doing brush control? Because even raccoons have some limitations
Yeah.
with all their brush that they would like to have to navigate through to survive. Are you building structure for them in the way of brush piles? Are you doing a census for them? It's a lot more difficult to do a raccoon-based one.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. I've seen people do salamander stuff before. Salamander stuff is very niche. But it's also very cool to sit there and work through with the landowner. Okay, what exactly can we do to improve salamander habitat on your property? And it was a game. We spent a solid 5.5 hours out there trying to figure it out, and we got it. And the cat approved it, so we're all good. But it takes all kinds for these wildlife valuations. I'm a big salamander guy, so I was like, yes, we are going to work through this because nobody else in this county is doing this. And I want to come out here during salamander season so I can come photograph them. So,
Probably some people, but is there a list of, wildlife that you can manage for, or probably better, is there a list of wildlife that, no, we're not gonna, can't.
so the question is there a list available of yes and no's basically for wildlife that can and cannot be managed for? There is not, basically the way that the regulation sits, if it is a native animal, native songbird, native mammal, what have you, breeding, wintering, sustaining population on your place. That's how the rule reads. So if you want to dedicate your property to Tennessee warblers during spring and fall migration, that is a native species. That is a wintering and migratory species. It works. If you are wanting to do something for a non-native species, like a European starling, not only will they frown upon it, I will frown upon it. And that might actually be worse. Because it takes a lot for me to frown upon a lot of things. But if you're managing for starlings, I might have to frown. So there's not necessarily a list. I don't want to say it's open to interpretation, but they kind of leave it open-ended so that you don't feel like, oh, well, this species wasn't listed, so I can't do it. So I definitely would not recommend managing for mosquitoes. You might not have a good working relationship with your neighbors or the counties. So. Anybody else? Cool.
Okay, thank you guys.